20 years later, I arrived at my sister's home, the one I'd given her, only to see her huddled asleep on the welcome mat by the front door. She was dressed in old gray rags, and my son was wiping the mud off his boots on her back, telling his guests, "That's just our crazy maid." I didn't scream. I took a step forward, and everyone froze. But before we unlock the secrets of this old southern house, and find out what happened inside, I want to ask you a small favor. Settle in and listen close. This is the story of how Clementine Brooks came back from the dead. The cab driver, a young man with tired eyes, squinted at me in the rearview mirror. "Sure, this is the place, Grandma?" he asked, slowing the car by the tall row iron gates. "It looks like money, and you sure they're expecting you?" I wasn't offended. I wore a simple gray coat I'd bought from a thrift store before leaving, and my worn-out boots had seen the Alaskan permafrost far more often than Georgia asphalt. That was years in the north, years I'd carved out of my own life, so that my family here in the soft climate of the south would want for nothing. My face was weathered, my skin tough as parchment, and my hair was solid silver. Not a single dark strand left. To this young man, I was just an old lady who'd probably confused the address. "This is it, son," I answered. My voice was raspy, even to my own ears, after days of silence on the road. I paid him, adding a generous tip of $1 that made his eyes go wide, and stepped onto the crunchy gravel drive. The air here was different, sweet. It smelled of damp, fallen leaves and a hint of wood smoke to lungs. Accustomed to the biting, frigid oxygen of the North Slope oil camps, this air felt thick, like syrup. The Brooks estate, my gift, my penance. The house stood deep within the grounds, huge and made of old wood with carved gingerbread trim that looked like lace. I remembered it differently, quiet and abandoned when I closed the deal years ago. Now the first floor windows glowed with golden electric light, and even from the gates I could hear the buzz of voices and the clinking of glasses. A party. I hadn't announced my arrival. I wanted to see their faces when I walked in. I'd pictured my younger sister, Lala Brooks, throwing her hands up, dropping her knitting, and rushing to embrace me, pressing her soft cheek against mine. I'd imagined my son, Grant, now a grown man, would kiss me solemnly and say, "Mama, you're finally home. Now you can rest." I walked the drive, the gravel crunching beneath my feet, marking the final few yards of my sentence. I carried only a small bag. Everything I'd earned, the millions of dollars that could buy half of this city, was in accounts they knew about, and in assets they were not yet supposed to know about. I was returning not as the Iron Duchess, as the men in the mines had called me, but simply as Mama, as Clementine. The front door was wide open, letting the autumn chill into the warm house. Trendy, rhythmic music, completely out of place against the historic walls, poured from inside. I climbed the steps to the porch, my heartbeat steady and calm. I had learned to control my heartbeat. Any sudden surge of emotion could cost lives during a mine collapse. I crossed the threshold. The foyer was flooded with light from enormous chandeliers. The walls, paneled in dark oak, were hung with heavy-framed paintings. I recognized some of them, family heirlooms I had forbidden them to sell. People crowded the center of the hall, men in expensive suits, women in evening gowns, sparkling with diamonds. The air was thick with the scent of costly perfume, roast beef, and hypocrisy. No one noticed me. I stood in the shadow of the doorway, a small gray figure against the backdrop of their dazzling celebration. Then my gaze fell. To the left of the entrance, where the shoe mats usually lay, something shapeless was crumpled, a heap of dirty gray rags that smelled sour. I first thought it was a dog bed. Someone had forgotten to move, but then the heap moved. A foot appeared from beneath the pile of worn fabric, thin, wrapped in pale skin with a filthy heel, and then I saw the face. It was obscured by matted silver hair, but I recognized the profile, that slightly hooked nose, that high forehead. Lala, my baby sister, the one I had left as mistress of this estate. She was lying right there on the floor, curled up on the stiff fibers of the welcome mat. She wore a dress that looked like a coarsely resewn curtain darkened with grime. Something clutched inside my chest, not from pain, but from cold. The kind of cold that precedes a blizzard, when every living thing hides, knowing death is coming. At that moment, a man entered from the garden, laughing loudly, tall and well-built, with a glass of wine in one hand. He wore a wine-led velvet blazer and tall leather boots caked in thick fall mud. It was Grant, my son. He wasn't looking down, or rather, he was looking, but didn't see a person there. He stepped directly toward Lala. I expected him to step over her, perhaps help her up, or yell at the staff for letting his aunt lie on the floor. Instead, he placed the sole of his muddy boot right on her back, between her shoulder blades, which were covered only by rags, and scraped his foot hard, wiping off clumps of clay onto her body. Lala didn't even flinch. She let out a soft, whimpering sound, a sound so familiar and terrible in its obedience. "Grant, my goodness," giggled a woman holding a champagne flute. "You'll stain the rug." Grant laughed. The sound was smooth and pleased. "Pay no attention," he announced loudly for the entire hall to hear, wiping his second boot on my sister's shoulder. "It's just our crazy maid. She loves sleeping on the mat, pretending she's a watchdog. We keep her out of kindness, family charity." The guests laughed nervously but dutifully. Someone stepped back in distaste. In that moment, the mother and me died. The woman who had sent money transfers for years, who dreamed of hugging her son, who carefully preserved his childhood drawings in a suitcase, she vanished. Her place was taken by the one the grim miners feared above the Arctic Circle. The Iron Duchess had returned. I didn't scream. I didn't rush him with my fists. Hysterics are for the weak. I simply took one step out of the shadows into the light calmly, deliberately. The noise in the room began to fade. First, the people standing closest to the door fell silent. They didn't just see an old woman in a cheap coat. They saw my eyes, the eyes I used to watch rock collapses in corner cheating foremen. The silence spread through the hall like ice water. Grant, who had his back to me, felt the silence. He slowly turned around. His smug smile was still plastered on his face, but a flicker of confusion already darted in his eyes. But he wasn't the first to react. In the center of the hall, holding a glass of brandy, stood a gay-haired man in a sharp suit, Judge Isaac Peterson, the city's powerful district judge, a man whose career I had once helped save, and the only person here who knew the real me. His eyes widened. His face instantly turned pale, losing all festive color. The crystal glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the polished floor with a deafening crash. Brandy splattered onto the guest's trousers, but no one moved. Judge Peterson, the man the entire city feared, bent low in a deep, almost servile bow. "Clementine Brooks," he whispered in the deathly quiet. We were told you had passed away." All eyes fixed on me. I stood motionless, looking only at my son. I saw a spasm of fear cross his face, but it was immediately replaced by something else. Something slick and calculating. Grant straightened up. He didn't rush to me. He didn't fall to his knees. Grant lifted his head. He burst into a loud theatrical laugh, pointing a finger at me. His eyes widened. He didn't see two frail old women in rags, gesturing to the stunned guests. He saw me straight as a rod in velvet, my poor mother really did come back, on my chest, and next to me a clean, calm Lala. The silence became absolute. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock. "Oh, look." Grant tried to laugh, but the sound came out nervous and barking. They escaped their rooms. "Poor, poor women. Security. Where is the security? Get them out of here. They can be violent." He waved a hand at the guards standing by the doors. Two burly men moved toward the staircase. I didn't move. I simply raised my hand, palm forward, a gesture that used to stop minecarts. "Stand still," I said. My voice was not loud, but it resonated through the hall, echoing off the walls. There was such authority in it that the guards froze mid-step. I began to descend slowly, step by step. Lala walked beside me, holding my arm tightly. The guests parted before us, forming an aisle. I saw their faces, surprised, frightened, curious. I found Judge Peterson's gaze. The judge stood in the front row, pale as a sheet. We reached the stage. Grant stepped back as if I were a ghost. "Mama," he hissed, and the microphone caught the sound, broadcasting it across the room. "What are you doing? Go back to your room." I reached out and snatched the microphone from his sweaty fingers. "We didn't escape our room, Grant," I said, looking straight into the hall, into the eyes of 100 witnesses. "We escaped your fabrication." I turned to the judge. He was staring at me, mouth agape, still holding the pen above the document, declaring me incompetent. "Your Honor," I said clearly and distinctly, "I, Clementine Brooks, am of sound mind and memory, and I am here to report a crime." A gasp went through the hall. Paige shrieked and clutched her heart. "Of theft," I continued, never taking my eyes off my son, "of forgery and of attempted unlawful restraint." Grant turned deep crimson. His mask was completely shattered. "She's delusional," he screamed, trying to grab the microphone back, but I stepped away. "Can't you see this is paranoia? Dr. Hayes, tell them confirm the diagnosis." All heads turned to the doctor, who was pressed against a column. Grant looked at him with desperate hope. This was his last chance. Hayes slowly stepped forward. His hands were shaking, but he looked at me, then at Grant. There was fear in his eyes, but the fear of me was stronger. "Those records!" The doctor's voice wavered but then grew firm. "The medical charts I provided to the court. They are fake." Grant froze. "What are you talking about?" he shrieked. "I wrote them at Grant Brooks's dictation," Hayes said loudly, looking at the floor. "Under threats. Clementine Brooks and Lala Brooks are perfectly healthy. Their condition was induced artificially with drugs their son forced them to take. An explosion. It was as if a bomb had gone off in the hall. Guests erupted in chatter. Someone screamed. The judge slammed the folder shut with a loud clap. Grant stood alone in the middle of the stage, naked in his lie. His world was collapsing. And then he did the only thing he knew how to do. He chose violence. Grant roared like a wounded animal. There was no calculation or cunning left in his eyes, only the savage fury of a cornered rat. He lunged at me. His fingers were curled, aiming for my throat. He didn't just want to strike, he wanted to silence me forever, to crush the voice that had ruined his illusion of grandeur. "Shut up! Die, you old hag!" he shrieked, leaping off the stage step. I didn't flinch. Years in the North taught me that when an avalanche is coming, running is useless. You must face it head on. I merely tightened my grip on Lala's hand. She had cried out and tried to shield me with her body, but the blow never came. A figure in a sharp gray suit rose between my son and me. Judge Isaac Peterson, the prosecutor who had averted his gaze yesterday, now stood like a rock. He intercepted Grant's hand in midair, firmly, professionally. "Don't you dare," he said quietly, but the whisper cut through all the noise in the hall. Grant jerked, trying to break free, but the old judge's grip was iron. "Let go! She's lying! She's crazy!" Grant spat. "I've heard enough." Isaac cut him off, forcefully shoving him back. Grant staggered and fell to his knees right at the judge's feet. "Lay a hand on the woman who built the economy of this city, and you won't live to see the trial. I'll personally make sure of it." At that moment, the hall sprang into action. The security guards, finally realizing where the power lay, seized Grant. He writhed, spewing curses, but his hands were already locked behind his back. Across the room, another movement began. Paige, realizing the ship was sinking, tried to slip unnoticed toward the service exit. She clutched a voluminous handbag that loudly clinked with the family silverware. "Where are you going, ma'am?" Martha blocked her path. Behind her stood the cook, the maid and the gardener, all the little people of this house who had endured years of humiliation, now looking at their mistress without fear. Paige backed away, dropping the bag. Silver spoons and forks scattered across the parquet floor, with a sound like the funeral toll for her ambitions. I walked to the microphone. A deadly silence fell over the hall. Everyone looked at me, the woman in velvet with the medal, who had just survived an attack by her own son and hadn't even adjusted her bun. "Release him," I said. The guards exchanged surprised glances but loosened their grip. Grant got up, dusting his knees. Hope flickered in his eyes again. He thought I would give up, that a mother's heart would soften. "Mama," he began, changing his tone to pitiful. "Mama, I'm sorry, I wasn't myself. It was the stress. We'll fix everything." I pulled the folded sheet of legal paper from inside my dress, the one from the coat lining. "You're right, son, I said calmly. We will fix everything right now. I unfolded the document and showed it to the judge and the judge. This is the deed to the house and land formalized years ago. My voice was firm. But you, Grant, never read the fine print. You were too busy spending my money. I walked up close to him. Section of the state code. I enunciated every word clearly. Revocation of gift. A donor has the right to revoke a gift if the recipient attempts to take the donor's life, the life of any member of their family, or causes the donor physical harm. Grant went as white as a corpse. And I continued, if the recipient's treatment of the gifted property, which holds great non-monetary value for the donor, creates a threat of its irreversible loss. I gestured around the room, pointing at the guests, the walls, and the garden outside the window. This house is the memory of my father. And you turned it into a WH house and wanted to sell it for demolition. You starved my sister. You tried to have me declared insane. You raised your hand to me in front of 100 witnesses. I turned to the notary, who was huddled in the corner, processed the revocation immediately. Grant truly collapsed to his knees, not theatrically but from helplessness. His legs wouldn't hold him. Mama, please, where will I go? I have nothing. I looked down at him. Inside me there was emptiness. No pity, no malice, just exhaustion. You had millions, Grant. You had a chance. You had family. You traded everything for smoke and mirrors. I nodded to Judge Peterson. Take them both. I am filing charges of fraud, grand larceny, and attempted murder. Police officers summoned by one of the guests were already entering the hall. They took Grant by the arms. He didn't resist. He hung on them like a rag doll, looking at me with empty, glazed eyes. Paige was led out behind him. She was sobbing, smearing mascara across her face. The guests stood frozen. They didn't know how to react. Applaud, leave, apologize. A tall official, the important investor the ball was thrown for, approached me. He looked embarrassed. Clementine Brooks, he began, extending his hand. We didn't know. We were told. Allow me to express my admiration. I didn't take his hand. I just looked at him and at everyone else. At those who had laughed at the crazy maid on the mat yesterday. At those who had drunk wine bought with my family's stolen money. Get out, I said quietly. The official flinched. Excuse me. Get out of my house, I repeated louder. The ball is over. No one dared to argue. The guests drifted toward the exit, silent, heads down, like school children reprimanded by the principal. Minutes later the hall was empty. Only Lala and I remained, along with Martha and Judge Peterson, and Dr. Hayes, who was sitting on a chair covering his face with his hands. I walked over to the doctor. He jumped. I'm ready to face punishment, he whispered. You'll treat people, I said, for free at the city clinic in the homeless division for years. If I find out you've taken a single dime or refused anyone, I'll have you jailed. Hayes looked up at me, his eyes full of tears, and nodded. It was better than prison. It was a chance for atonement. Judge Peterson approached me. He took my hand and kissed it, old-fashioned and respectful. Forgive me, Clementine, he said. I'm an old fool. I let my judgment cloud. You corrected yourself, Isaac. I smiled weakly. Thank you for your help. When everyone was gone, Lala and I remained in the vast empty hall. Confetti and silver spoons were scattered on the floor, but the air felt clean. I looked at my sister. She stood by the window, gazing into the dark garden. They're gone, Lala, I asked. She turned around. Her face was lit by a quiet, peaceful smile. Yes, Tina. All the demons are gone. I walked to the door and flung it wide open. The cold night wind rushed into the house, blowing out the remnants of expensive perfume and fear. I picked up the dirty mat where my sister had slept, rolled it up, and threw it forcefully out the door into the darkness. No more mats, I said. We'll buy a new one tomorrow, and a new life. A week later, the house still smelled of fresh paint and newly cut wood, a scent I preferred to any French perfume. Martha the gardener and I had scrubbed every corner. I ordered all the furniture from Grant and Paige's bedroom to be burned in the yard. The fire consumed the velvet headboard and silk canopies, carrying away the memory of the years of humiliation with the smoke. Now I sat in the garden on a low bench, plunging my hands into the loose, cold earth. I was planting tulips. The bulbs settled in the holes like small promises of a future spring. The dirt under my nails reminded me of the north. But there the earth was an enemy. Here it was a mother. Tina, the tea is ready. I turned around. On the veranda, wrapped in a warm sheep's wool blanket, sat Ella. A steaming kettle sat on the table beside her. She held a delicate porcelain cup from the very set we thought had been sold, but which Martha, smart woman, had hidden in the cellar years ago. Lala no longer trembled. Her gaze was clear and calm, though a shadow of the horror she'd endured still lingered deep in her eyes. But with each passing day, that shadow grew fainter. I brushed the dirt from my hands and walked to the veranda. The sun breaking through the yellowing leaves of the old maples painted fanciful patterns on the floor. "How do you feel?" I asked, sitting down in the rocking chair next to her. "Good," my sister smiled. "For the first time in a long time, just quiet." "You know, Tina, I've been thinking the East Wing, it's empty." I raised an eyebrow questioningly, sipping the hot thyme tea. "It has 5 rooms," she continued, gazing somewhere over the trees, bright and spacious. Isaac Peterson said, "There are many people in the city like I."